Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever time it may be where you're at right now. My name is Eddie Jean Hall Jr., and thank you for joining me for another edition of The Urban Therapist. I am your host, and joining me today, as always, is my good friend and the producer of The Urban Therapist, Mr. Lewis Rhodes. How you doing today, Lou?
Woo-hoo. Wait, you know what? I should have did this.
Happy New Year.
That's right.
Happy
That's
New
right.
Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New
That's it.
Year.
That's it. Happy New Year, man. And Happy New Year to all of our listeners and our subscribers. Listen, uh, we owe you a big apology. It's been a lot of things going on the last couple of months, and that's why you have not seen us. But we're back, ready to get the new year started and ready to get things rolling. We want to thank you all for your patience, and we're going to be sending out some notifications to let you know we're getting back started with things. So, had a lot going on, Lou.
I'm feeling myself today.
You're feeling yourself today. See, you see how happy Lewis is for us to be
Right.
back
I'm
doing our
back. We
thing.
back.
So
We
hey,
back.
we're back doing it. We are back doing it. And again, welcome to everybody. Happy New Year. The 2022, went out interesting. And I'm gonna share some things about that later on. But hey, man, I'm glad to be back. You hear that echo?
Are
We
you
good?
gonna?
Okay, I just checked it. Listen, so many things going on right now. I don't know. Let me get started. You know, let's get into the topic. I was going to tell you about something else, but we're gonna get started. We're gonna get started in the topic for today. Hey, we want to remind you that you can join us on YouTube, Facebook, Oh, look at that.
But you know what? We're not supposed to hear no music. All right. Look, we are rusty.
Listen, man, you want to say you got all these surprises? I'm like, oh, okay.
I wasn't. That wasn't a surprise.
That wasn't a surprise.
Well, I mean, obviously the screen is still the same, but that music wasn't. That wasn't
Oh
expected.
wow,
So
man.
tell them where we can find them. Find us at.
Okay. You can find us at im.the.urbantherapist@gmail.com. Please email us. Let us know how you doing, what's going on, what shows, what topics you would like us to cover. You can also find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course on YouTube. Okay. Listen, before we had our little hiatus, we had started talking about the stages of grief. And the reason I did that topic, Lou, is because as I shared with you and our listeners back this fall, my mother died after a long battle with cancer. And I won't say she succumbed because she won. I mean, she did her thing, and it was just her time. And she went out in peace. And it was really challenging because I've helped and worked with people walk through death and walk through the death of their loved ones. And I've experienced it before with my father before I became full blown in the field of counseling. But then dealing with it with my mom, the way it happened, it was really interesting. So it made me take a new look. It made me take another look at grief and what we go through and the stages of grief, because I was experiencing some things and didn't really realize what I was going through. And so we started talking about the different stages of grief in the show. So I'll be honest with you all, doing the show, man, was kind of like therapy for me
Mm.
in sharing and talking about it. And so we started out by bringing out that there are 5 different stages. And but before we go back into that, I want to share something with you all. Normally, when we talk about grief, usually we talk about death, and then so when we talk about grief, it's kind of has this heavy feeling of, ooh, this is not something I really want to talk about, or it's really sad. But grief is positive, and it's important to talk about it. And it doesn't only happen when we're dealing with life or death, I should say, situations. So it's important for us to understand the stages of grief, because when we go through things like a divorce, break up with a significant other, maybe being downsized from a job that you really love, we go through the stages of grief. And so I want you to understand, when we're talking about grief, we're not just talking about dealing with death. As a matter of fact, if we go through this to the slides, Lou, the first one of the first slides today kind of recap talks about the potential causes of grief. And the loss of a loved one, loss of a friendship or a relationship, loss of a job, business, or income, loss of control, loss of independence, loss of physical ability. These are some of the things that can lead to grief. Also, loss of social support. And there we go. Loss of social support, loss of a home, loss of rights, loss of identity, traumatic events or disasters, or changes to daily life. These are things that happen to us on such a regular basis that a lot of times we don't think about the fact that we're going through the stages of grief when these things happen. I give you a quick example when in the loss of rights. Right now, I'm working in the criminal justice system, and when men and women are incarcerated, they lose certain rights. And that adjustment to being in prison now, you go through or you start going through the stages of grief because life as you knew it is gone.
Mm.
And now learning how to adjust to this new reality is difficult. And to anybody out there who, listen, trust me, watching the movies, watching the TV shows is nothing like actually being in prison. I don't care how cool you think you are, how smart you think you are, how bad you think you are. Trust me, it is nothing like actually being there. And so, again, that's just an example. Like I said, you lose your rights. And so you go through anger, denial, depression. And so if a lot of times people don't realize when you get a divorce, if your husband or your wife, you come home one day and they say, "Hey, I'm leaving." And you're not the one that wanted that. They are the one who decided they wanted that. You can begin the process of going through the stages of grief. So, even if you have not experienced the death of a loved one, as we're going through and talking about this, I want you to understand all of us go through this from time to time. So, understanding what's happening to us, how our bodies may be reacting, is extremely important. Okay. So, with that being said, Lou, you ready to get started for today?
I am ready.
All right. So, let's get with it. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These are commonly called the 5 stages of grief. Now, what this is a process. This is our mind trying to deal with what has become our new reality. Now, I want to bring this out. You do not necessarily go through these stages in sequence. You don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might go through denial, then you may hit acceptance. You may hit acceptance right off the bat, but then you may go through depression. So it's not so much the sequence of the stages, but it's understanding all the different things that we go through. Grief is not one specific emotion or event, it is a series of different stages that we go through. The one, denial, which is one of the first ones we talked about, denial is our minds trying to cope with the new reality. It's like you get hit, bam, something happened. And so the first thing we want to do is say, no, wait a minute. No, it didn't. How did that happen? And so that denial is a way of protecting ourselves. And so, during this stage in grieving, our reality has totally shifted. And I don't know if you and I really understand the impact of when our reality shifts, when life changes, when it's no longer the same. It may actually be that way, but our brains have to process and catch up with that. And so, in order for us to do that, we go through a period of denial because my thought processes and my thinking have to adjust to what's going on. Then the next one we talked about, oh, let me share this other one with you about denial. And I just did kind of say it. Denial attempts to slow the process of the hit. Okay. Denial attempts to slow things down and take us through it one step at a time rather than running the risk of feeling overwhelmed by our emotions. So if you know somebody that's just suffered a loss, it could be, again, a divorce, loss of a job. And the way they're talking about it is like you're listening to them, you're going, don't they understand what just happened to them? Give them room to breathe. Okay.
Mm.
Because what's happening is their mind is trying to catch up with the hit. I think Lou, last time we talked about this, I said it's like the um the airbag in your car.
Mm.
You feel the impact, but the airbag has to deploy in order to stop you from hitting the steering wheel. That's the same thing denial does for us when we're dealing with traumatic events that take place in our lives. Okay. So it's not only an attempt to pretend that the loss does not exist, it's also again trying to absorb and understand
Mm.
what really happened. Okay. Now the other thing we talked about is anger. And we talked about how anger is a part of the grieving process. And one of the coolest things I read is how anger is a way of us trying to reach out to people because anger is one of those emotions that we kind of justify having, you know? Look at this slide. We are trying to adjust to a new reality and are likely to experiencing extreme emotional discomfort. There is so much to process that anger may feel like an emotional outlet or it allows us an emotional outlet. So, when you're going through the grieving process and you feel angry, you don't have to feel guilty. If you need to yell, if you need to scream, if you need to fuss, I tell people, listen, if you want to fuss at God going through this, fuss at him about it. He's big enough to take it. The important thing is you don't deny yourself that right to feel angry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may even feel angry toward the other person.
Mm.
And then there's that guilt of feeling angry, but you're angry because that person is not no longer with you. You may be feeling angry that they succumb to the disease after a strong battle. And now you're left alone and you're angry at them because you're alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you feel guilty because you're angry and you don't want to feel angry. And that's why we feel guilty. It's okay to be angry. One of the most important things I want to get to everybody in this is allow yourself to flow. Don't pull yourself back from what you're going through in the grieving process. So we talked about denial, we talked about anger. And remember, all these things are ways in which our mind is trying to wrap itself around what's going on. You ready for the next one, Lou?
Yeah, I got a
And this,
question now.
okay, go ahead.
So I want to know: is there a prescribed time frame for any of the stages?
In my professional opinion and in what I've read, it shouldn't take anyone any longer than, or if you find yourself dealing with any of these stages, any longer than you need to, then you are right. So in other words, nah, there
Mm-hmm.
there is no time frame for how long you go through each of these.
Right.
There's not. And I'm glad you asked me that question because you'll have people say, "Oh, you should be moving on by now."
Mm-hmm.
You know, no, no. It's all in how we handle it. That's what's important. It's all in how we handle it. Okay. So if you're out there listening to me and Lou, because he just asked a good question, somebody was probably asking. No, there's no set time frame. Everybody deals with this differently. So the next one is bargaining. So we got denial, excuse me. We've got anger. And then the next thing is bargaining. And I was like, bargaining as part of the stages of grief. Now, what's going on in bargaining, and when we're bargaining, we're trying to hold on to the hope that we can change the situation. Like, for example, I remember growing up, if I got caught doing something by my mom and daddy that I shouldn't do, and then that bargaining came in because, man, I'm trying to make sure I can come up with something where that belt ain't gonna meet my butt. Okay. So the bargaining would take place. I won't do it anymore. I promise. And it just give me one more chance. I'm so sorry. Now, that's the same thing we go through when we're faced with a serious loss.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to try to control, because what we're trying to do again is avoid the pain. And we're looking at, we're kind of feeling maybe if we can bargain that we might be able to control the situation. And in this one slide, how it brings out, you might think to yourself that you're willing to do anything and sacrifice everything in your life. Look at this. If your life was restored to the way it was before the loss. I'm trying. There's something I want to say, man. I'm trying to figure out how I want to say it in
Mm-hmm.
dealing with this, especially that phrase, if your life was restored to the way it was before the loss.
Mm-hmm.
See, bargaining can be very dangerous because sometimes people may make commitments that they're not, that they shouldn't make, or that may put them in compromising situations because they're not willing to accept the new reality that the grief is presenting. And in this instance, man, I'm specifically thinking about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes things happen to a person where a relationship ends that was unhealthy for them in the first place. But remember, we talked about how we're trying to avoid the pain of the loss. So they start bargaining with the person in order to get them to stay,
Mm-hmm.
when actually letting that person leave
It's
and
healthier. Mm-hmm.
dealing with the grief or the stages of grief that you will go through in that loss, in that new reality, as painful as it may be, is better for you
Right.
than bargaining and making that thing work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now in dealing with, let's say, let's switch back to dealing with death of a loved one, or if a person is going through their last final stages and dealing with a serious illness, or even let's say if you're faced with a serious illness, you know, we start bargaining and coming up with a variety of promises, like, okay, God, if you can heal this person,
Yep.
I will turn my life around. Jesus, I'll go to church every week and I won't fall asleep. I go on Wednesday, Sunday, Saturday, Friday night, watch Creflo Dollar. I will do it all. And now I'm being a little facetious, but these are the kind of things that we
Sure.
promise.
Sure.
Then the other one is, I promise to be better if you will let this person live, or I'll never get angry again if you can stop him or her from dying or leaving me. What happens with when traumatic events happen, grief makes us face our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
There are times and there are things in my life that I cannot avoid. I cannot change. And this bargaining is a part of the process. Again, it's natural, but it's a part of me coming into that reality. In this next slide, where it says, there is an acute awareness of our humanness in this stage of grieving, when we realize that there is nothing we can do to influence, change, or create a better end result. But we have to go through this because we're trying, and our mind is saying we can do it. Because remember, in denial, that's that buffer. I'm trying to adjust to this, and then in anger, I'm frustrated and I'm feeling it. And now I'm trying to figure out what I can do. But what happens is ultimately I realize this may be a situation where there's nothing I can do. Bargaining comes from a feeling of helplessness and gives us a perceived sense of control over something that feels so out of our control.
Right. Isn't it funny how the mind, the human psyche, tries to compensate?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you called it the airbag phenomenon. It's like all of these different stages have some form of compensating for the loss, and
Right.
then for you trying to find your bearings, accept it, and move on. But all along the way, your mind is trying to help you, although if you stay in that state, it may not be so helpful. But it's like you have to go through it
Mm-hmm.
in order to heal.
Exactly. And I like what you said. We have to go through it in order to heal. And the reason we're talking about it in this type of depth right now is because it doesn't take away from the intensity of the pain, but at least if you understand what you're going through, then you can work with it. You know what I'm saying? It's like when I'm doing my groups and I teach people about the stages of change. I said, it doesn't take away from the hard work that we have to put into and the sacrifices that we have to make, but it helps us understand where I'm at. And if I know where I'm at, then I know where I need to go. So, this today, we're talking about this stage of bargaining. Again, it's natural. We negotiate because we're feeling desperate. We want to try to minimize the pain. And we go through this because it's a part of coming into our new reality. I want to leave you with this. We just don't step in our new reality. Boom, I'm here. Oh yeah, I got it. It's great. I can deal with this. I'm all right. I'm fine. People may say that. Some people. And I've seen people do it. But in reality, all these things are happening in their heads. Okay. And what you may not feel right now, it may not hit you for a few days, a few weeks, or a few months. But these are some of the things that take place. And bargaining is one of the stages of grief.
Mhm.
So we're going to end the show right there with that. Want to thank everybody for joining us today. Lewis, I appreciate you, man, hanging in,
Yes,
and
sir.
we're getting things back on track. We got a couple more things to cover as far as the stages of grief are concerned before we finish out this series, and then we go into our new topic. Again, we want to remind you that you can join us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. You can email us at im.the.urban.therapist.com, no, at gmail.com. Somebody told me one time, man, that's a lot of dots, but yeah, once you do it one time, you got it. It's easy. So we look forward to hearing from you. We'll be with you in our next episode where we will talk about depression as one of the stages of grief. Take care, everybody.